The world of Left 4 Dead is full of unsolved mysteries. From UFOs and blood harvest to the insane stories of skinwalkers, this series is full of them. Many of you have watched my previous unsolved mystery videos. For the most part, all the mysteries in this video will be completely new. There will be some you recognize, but 90% of these are topics I either haven't gone over or haven't gone into depth with. This video and the ones that come after will be structured in the Iceberg chart format. This video in particular will cover the first two layers of that chart, and as these videos release, I'll get farther down the iceberg into the stranger topics. For those of you who don't know how an iceberg video works, it's an iceberg cut into various layers, with the ones at the top being relatively known by the community, but as you make your way down, the topics will get darker and less familiar. This video is those shallow layers. I went ahead and made my own iceberg for this video, taking from things I know and various other charts in the community. Not all of the entries are mysteries. I threw in some other interesting topics as well. In my initial series, I mainly went over concrete topics while occasionally covering anecdotes. However, in this series, I want to entertain some of the more, how do I put this, insane theories later down the line. And I did want to talk about more unsolved mysteries, but I didn't want to do the same things, so I decided to switch it up a little bit. Shout out to the ultimate Left 4 Dead iceberg, linked down below in the description. Some of these entries are directly from there. Before we jump into the video, if you enjoy this content and like what I do, please consider subscribing. We're so close to 30,000 subscribers. It'd mean the world to me if we could all hit that milestone together. As always, if this video reaches 1,000 likes, I'll post bunny pictures on my community tab. With all that out of the way, let's dive straight into the waters of the unsolved mystery iceberg. Explained. Starting off on the very top layer, the first entry is Keith. Most of you probably know who this is already, so let's keep this entry fairly short. Keith is a character that is consistently referenced by Ellis. Ellis likes to tell stories, likely as a coping mechanism. Now, Keith doesn't actually appear in the game. There's no character model for him, or even any voice lines. Most players speculate Keith doesn't actually exist, citing that the only evidence of his existence exists through Ellis. And Ellis is an extremely unreliable narrator. There's times where he tells stories so outlandish they have to be fake, and other times where he sort of just retells the same story but in a different way. If I had to guess, Keith was probably someone who was real at one point in time. However, he probably ended up dying because of the infection, and Ellis never really came to terms with that, opting to instead tell stories about him, extrapolating the details to insane lengths to remember the good old times, rather than facing reality. If you want a more in-depth look with examples, check out my previous Unsolved Mystery series, as I dive deeper on that topic there. The next entry on the iceberg is titled Left 4 Dead Cinematic 1 is Darker, and it implies exactly what the title says. The Left 4 Dead 1 cinematic is darker. Valve only ever made two cinematics for Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 combined. The first one was released to introduce the first game, and the second one was released to introduce the second game. They've released other advertisement trailers for things like DLC, but nothing on the level of those first two trailers. A lot of people point out the fact that the first trailer is darker literally and figuratively. The Left 4 Dead 1 cinematic trailer takes place at night, near the first campaign, No Mercy. The music, combined with the fact that it only takes place at night, is a stark contrast to what we see in the second trailer. The second game trailer takes place almost entirely during the day, with the exception of any Dark Carnival clips. Its music is loud, bombastic, and rowdy. It almost makes you feel like an action hero. Some players complain that they ruin the tone of the second game by making it feel goofy with the trailer, but in my opinion, both of these trailers are amazing. They just set out to accomplish different things. I'm sure the team who made the cinematic didn't want to just do the same thing they did before. Personally, I am a bigger fan of the first trailer, as it just speaks to what I envision as the tone of Left 4 Dead. And that's not to say they screwed up the tone of the second game at all. Far from it. They actually did an incredible job. But if you want a deeper analysis on the trailers for each game and each game as a whole, I made a video a few months ago titled The Forgotten Atmosphere of Left 4 Dead 1. It's a decent watch. Give it a shot if you're interested. Left 4 Dead 2 Boycott is the next entry. This one's a bit interesting. A lot of modern day fans who haven't kept up with the game since release will probably not recognize what this is referencing, so let me explain. You see, Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 released exactly 1 year apart, and I mean exactly. The first one came out on November 17th, 2008, and the second one released on the exact same day, November 17th, but in 2009. Now, in today's day and age, most fans would be ecstatic if Valve were to ever release two major major games that close to each other. But back then, a lot of people didn't share the same sentiment. Some fans thought Valve would be tossing aside the first game just to make a quick buck with the second one, so fans did what fans normally do and complained, even going as far as to make an official forum to protest the release of Left 4 Dead 2. The original post on Steam's community tab still exists today, and it's kind of creepy reading it after all this time. They cite the main reason for the boycott was that Valve would supposedly stop support for Left 4 Dead 1. They also explained that Valve promised support and free updates for the original, which had not yet been released. Now, with hindsight, we know this isn't necessarily true. Valve released many DLCs for both games: The Sacrifice, The Passing, Crash Course, and more. For the DLCs that included the original group of survivors, they were added to Left 4 Dead 1, alongside the second game. Eventually, Valve saw the two separate games as meaningless and decided to merge the two, adding the content from the first into the second. Nowadays, there's little to no reason to play the original Left 4 Dead, but it's safe to say that fans had it pretty good back then when Valve actually released games they could boycott. The next entry is a reference to a cut campaign for Left 4 Dead 1 called Damn It. I went into extreme detail on this campaign literally 2 videos ago, so if you want an extreme 20-minute breakdown on that campaign, go watch that. But for those of you who haven't seen that video, let me summarize some of the most important points. Between the events of Dead Air and Blood Harvest exists a narrative gap. Canonically, we don't know how they get to that campaign, as we see them just appear at the campground. Damn It was meant to bridge those campaigns, taking our survivors through Allegheny National Forest and ending with Kinzua Dam. Kinzua Dam, by the way, was the set piece the map was named after. Today, you can find the official map on the Steam Workshop alongside remasters made by the community. Overall, it's a very interesting campaign. I wish we got to see it. It fit perfectly as a Left 4 Dead 20th anniversary gift. Although I would appreciate another game for that milestone, it seems pretty unlikely. That's all I have to say. Once again, if you want more details, go watch that Damn It video. Let's move on. The Green Flu is the title of the next entry and will be by far the most recognizable. It is another entry I just have to get out of the way for the sake of the Iceberg. I debated even putting it onto the Iceberg in the first place, but a lot of charts included it near the top, so I might as well cover it briefly. The Green Flu is the name given to the infection within the Left 4 Dead universe. Many players and content creators create theories based on the infection. Its origins largely remain a mystery, but in simple terms, it turns people into zombies, causing them to violently attack anyone that's not infected. What separates the Green Flu from your typical zombie virus is its mutations, but I'll dive deeper on that in a later entry. Let's just move on. A few of the icebergs I looked at had entries titled similarly to this one. I'm not 100% sure what they were referencing when they said Saferoom Differences, but I'll give it my best shot. This could be a reference to the Left 4 Dead 1 campaigns and how they were ported over, although I'm pretty sure everything was kept the same. It could also be a reference to how assets were moved around in between the levels. When you begin a chapter, after you enter the safe room at the end of the previous level, you'll notice that some of the items in the room appear to move in front of the last door. I and most players believe this to be the survivors canonically moving things around the room to try and board up where they came from, in the hopes of stopping any infected that might try to break down the door. It's also a technique used by the devs to hide the fact that behind the door is just a pitch black void. There is another possibility this entry could be referencing, and that's the out of bound areas, particularly in the second game. Sometimes when you teleport to the new chapter, the previous level behind the safe room will just not make any sense. The most obvious example of this is the safe room that connects the third and fourth chapter of Swamp Fever. At the end of the third chapter, you have to run across this bridge to get into the safe room that's high above the ground. However, if you look through the safe room door into the next chapter, the area doesn't make any sense. There's bushes, trees, and ground that weren't in that position previously. It's a goofy oversight, but let's just leave it at that. The next entry is Boomer was the first special infected, and just as it sounds, this entry describes the first special infected to ever mutate as a cause of the Green Flu. Throughout the course of the Left 4 Dead 1 campaigns, we see a wide variety of specials. Canonically, the only special infected that were originally in the first game were supposed to spawn in the original chapters, so specials like the Spitter, Jockey, and Charger never actually walked the streets of No Mercy, at least at the time our survivors are supposed to pass through. In the cinematic trailer for Left 4 Dead 1, we see Bill touch the body of a dead Boomer, and he even points out how they're changing. Weeks later, Sita discovers the Boomer and creates these posters to try and analyze them. One such poster can be found at the very first level of Dead Center in the room to your right as you come down the stairs. It would make sense that the Boomer was the first special infected, as it had to be around long enough for bile jars to be created, and for Sita and the government to acknowledge their existence. The next topic on my list is the Sacrifice comic. This is a pretty well-known piece of media within the Left 4 Dead community. The Sacrifice comic was a comic series that attempted to connect the events of Blood Harvest to the Sacrifice. The comic was split into 4 different parts. The first of the 4 parts was released on September 14th, 2010, after the release of the second game. Its release came about a month before the Sacrifice campaign would release. So not only did it serve as a sense of much-needed narrative for the first group of survivors, but it gave the players a chance to look at what's to come. Within the story of the Sacrifice comic, we get to see the origins of our original group of survivors. Each part of the comic tackles a new character. We see how Lewis discovered the infection through his office job, how Francis found out through his biker group, how Zoe had to tragically kill her father because of a bite, and lastly how Bill found out because he was in a hospital. Like I mentioned, the comic's main plot connects the ending of Blood Harvest to the beginning of the Sacrifice campaign. To summarize its major plot points, our survivors get taken to an outpost and are held by the military. The base eventually gets overrun by the infected and they're forced to escape via train. Once off the train, they eventually find a sailboat which they plan to use to escape to a nearby island, but not before Bill ends up sacrificing himself to raise the bridge needed to move the boat. In the last shot, we see the rest of our survivors sail off into the sunset. If you want more details, I urge you to please read it online. You can simply find it by typing in the Sacrifice comic into Google. I'm sure you'll find it. We have now reached the second layer. The first entry on this layer is about the discrepancies between the official Left 4 Dead cinematics and the in-game levels. An example of one of these discrepancies is the apartment building in the very first chapter of No Mercy. Towards the end of the trailer, a tank chases our survivors into an alleyway, where they decide to climb up a staircase. Whilst our survivors climb the stairway, the tank smashes his hands into a nearby wall and throws a slab of concrete towards them. Long story short, the tank falls to his death and the camera pans up to show our survivors resting on this metal platform before ending the trailer entirely. But what do we actually see in game? First off, there's nowhere near the amount of rubble that should be on the ground. And for the rubble that does exist, it's all piled up into a wall to block off the alley they should have come from. Secondly, the building across from the apartment is missing the giant gaping hole the tank just created. And lastly, the metal platform the survivors rest on doesn't even exist. It's straight up gone. While some of those details aren't very important, I feel like they could have kept the hole in the wall at the very least. Most players agree this was done for gameplay reasons and/or was an oversight during development. Either way, now you can't not think of it when watching the trailer again. Special Infected Evolution is the name of the next entry and is a reference to the way the green flu mutates someone again post-infection. Everyone who's played the game has encountered a Special Infected in one way or another. An example of the Special Infected are, but not limited to, the tank, the witch, the jockey, the charger, and among others. While most players know of their existence, only lore fanatics will know there's more details hiding under the hood. For starters, the Special Infected don't just pop up randomly. The green flu mutates people based on how they live their lives prior to the infection. The witch is one such example. The witch is created after the green flu infects someone, specifically women, with depression. We know this because witches are always seen crying in either standing or sitting positions. Another obvious example is the tank, which mutates due to the host's use of steroids or body enhancement drugs, hence why the tank has incredibly large muscles, particularly in its upper body, with less emphasis on its legs. I honestly could make an entire video diving into each of the Special Infected, but I think you get the point. If you listen to the developer commentary of Left 4 Dead 2, the developers explain how they had around 30 different ideas for Special Infected during the game's development. While they eventually decided on only a handful, it's heavily implied that more Special Infected would pop up as the infection progressed. The next entry is titled The Military. I think all of us know who the real-world military is, and you shouldn't be surprised that they do in fact exist in the world of Left 4 Dead. The mystery around the military and its actions revolve around the fact that they pretty much stand no chance against the infected. I talked about the Sacrifice comic earlier, and the fall of the military outpost in that series is a perfect way to illustrate this point. In both games, Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, our survivors' main goal throughout the entire storyline is to reach the military, in the hopes of achieving safety. And as I literally just mentioned, this doesn't work out for the first group of survivors, but the second group is left up for interpretation at the end of the parish. So who knows, maybe the military is locked in. For a long time, one of the mysteries surrounding the military is its use of vehicles and weaponry. In the first game, we saw a lot of military equipment from the Vietnam era. The M16 and green camo Humvees are just a couple examples of this. Later on in the second game, we find sand color Humvees and weaponry, specifically the Scar. Correct me if I'm wrong, but these items would have been been deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan at the time Left 4 Dead 2 took place. The developers explained through the developer commentary that the reason for all the different eras of technology is because the US would have been recalling all these assets to help with its domestic affairs. In other words, the infection. There's other more specific mysteries that would have to do with the military, but I'll get into those later. I mentioned the developer commentary twice already, but you should give it a playthrough if you're interested. It's more about the development process of the game than the lore side of things, but it's an interesting view. This entry is something I've touched on in one way or another in one of my previous videos, and that's whether or not the green flu infection affects animals or not. In the first Unsolved Mysteries series, I talked about the cows you can find in Blood Harvest and Dark Carnival. If you don't know what I'm talking about, within those campaigns you can find piles of dead cows with the skin removed off their heads. I've speculated in the past that this was most likely due to testing on the cows and not a direct cause of the infection. However, cows aren't the only animals in the game. In the background of the games you can hear dogs barking, and in the skies of some of the campaigns you can spot birds flying overhead. A large portion of the community has come to the conclusion that the green flu can likely spread through animals, infecting some but not others. Early on in development there were infected animals that were drawn up but entirely scrapped. I'll get into some of the specific ones in future videos. There's a theory out there that the green flu originated from a strand of mad cow disease. This is one possible reason for the cow tests, but it's also a possibility they were tested for rabies. The thought of infected animals attacking you alongside the human hordes is crazy to think about. Imagine if you had to fight off infected ravens in the forest of Blood Harvest. No doubt that would be a horrible gameplay decision, but it would be funny as hell to watch your fellow survivors run around as they try to shoot killer birds. I feel like if a Left 4 Dead 3 were to ever come out, adding some sort of infected animal fodder would be an interesting idea. Let's move on. The topic of whether or not the infected eat is highly debated within the Left 4 Dead community. Why does this matter? Well, in one of my previous videos titled The Withering Theory, I proposed the idea of all the infected dying out due to starvation, just like in the 28 Days Later franchise. The point of contention within the community is simple: do they eat or not? Players who believe they don't eat point out that we never see them eat in the games. While the infected have a wide variety of idle animations, none of them seem to depict the infected eating any kind of food. Other players argue that while we never see them eating, that doesn't mean that they don't eat at all, arguing that they could just be eating off screen. Personally, I believe they just don't eat, because I think if the developers wanted to imply that idea, they would have just mocapped an actor eating something. This debate has developed into a larger argument because of the bigger implications I mentioned. Whether or not they eat will decide if waiting out the infection is a viable survival option, because if all the infected just starve, then why not just bunker down? It's an interesting thought experiment. I suggest you watch my Withering Theory video if you want a deeper dive on the topic. The next entry is once again about how the green flu mutates, but not in the way I've talked about before. While yes, the green flu can and does mutate some people into special infected, this entry is referencing the fact that the infection itself mutates. Evidence of this phenomenon resides within the Sacrifice comic. In it, we see a doctor describe to our survivors why the infection is so dangerous. It never stays the same. For an infection that constantly mutates, it's incredibly hard to concoct a cure, if not impossible. This single fact essentially rips away the power of modern medicine and leaves your survival up to chance. For those who aren't carriers, survival is extremely difficult. Forget about killing the infected, even breathing the same air could cause you to succumb to the infection. In the comic, we see members of the army who aren't carriers wear gas masks. One of the soldiers even gets his mask ripped off during an altercation with Bill and Zoe and pleads for them not to breathe on him. The doctor goes on to explain that the green flu is sometimes airborne and sometimes not, implying that multiple strands of the infection could exist at the same time. The infection isn't sentient, so not every bit of it mutates at the exact same time. So one part of the United States might have the airborne one, while another part might have the not airborne one. In the same way that one virus in 2019-2020, cough, cough, ended up mutating into multiple different strands. For the final entry on the second layer, we have how exactly did the Left 4 Dead 1 survivors meet? Ooh, this is a very good mystery. This is an idea I've been wanting to make an entire video on, but decided to just add it to this iceberg. This is truly a mystery, as the game never gives us a concrete answer. Don't just take it from me, take it from the developers. They mentioned in the developer commentary of the second game that they decided to dive deeper on the backgrounds of each character for that game because it wasn't something they really did in the first game. Sure, in the Sacrifice comic we see each of the survivors find out about the infection, but never exactly how they form their 4-player group. They just seem to go from not knowing each other to a decent group at the beginning of No Mercy. The trailer for Left 4 Dead 1 gives off the vibe that the group has been with each other for at least a few days before the time it takes place. How do I think they meet? Well, since I really have nothing to go off of, I'd say they probably stumbled into each other one at a time, rather than just collecting all at once. Zoe probably wandered out of her apartment and saw Bill on the street. Francis may have seen them walking around town, and Lewis may have just spotted them fighting. Like I said, we don't have anything to go off of essentially, but let me know what you guys think down below. One of my friends and fellow YouTubers, Payne TJM, made a video on this topic, so check out that video if you're interested. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I want to remind you that this video is just the beginning of the series. Like my first Unsolved series, I plan to make more videos covering these topics. This video only covered the first 2 layers of the iceberg chart I made, so there's plenty more to cover. And I'm sorry if these felt like they were relatively known. That's kind of the point because this is the beginning of the iceberg, but stick with the series and I'm sure it'll get a lot better. I already have the entire chart made, I just have to make the videos covering the entries. I mentioned this in the intro, but a lot of people in Discord and in the comments of videos wanted me to continue the series, but I don't just want to do the same thing for the rest of my life. I hope the iceberg chart format and change in style of video made it feel new but familiar. There are way darker entries to come, like I said, so stay tuned. That's all I have for you guys. Make sure to subscribe and like the video. Have a nice rest of your day. Peace out.